All right, so this time we're really diving in. We've got this fascinating talk with Andreas Antonopoulos all about Bitcoin.
Yeah, and he gets pretty deep, doesn't he? Like way beyond just what is Bitcoin.
Yeah, this is more like Bitcoin. Prepare to have your mind blown. But before we go full on sci-fi future, he does start with something pretty relatable.
You mean the whole buying a pound of coffee with Bitcoin for like $12,000?
Exactly. I mean, who knew a cup of joe could cost so much?
Right. But his point is that crazy price tag represents something much bigger. It was him participating in the very beginning of a real living economy.
It's like he's saying, hey, I'm not just talking about this in theory, I'm living it.
Yeah. He gets paid in Bitcoin. His employees get paid in Bitcoin. It's actually happening.
And it gets even wilder. He starts painting this picture of a future where banks are obsolete, money is just information.
He even talks about charities being run by like autonomous agents.
That's like something straight out of a science fiction novel.
Right. And get this, he calls it money as a content type.
Okay, now that sounds a little techie.
It does, but what he means is imagine sending a Bitcoin transaction that's encoded in emojis.
Wait, hold on. Emojis as actual currency.
That's what he's saying.
Okay, now that's something I can get behind. But he's not all sunshine and rainbows about the future, right? Like, what about the risks? What if corporations try to control this whole thing?
Oh, he definitely goes there. He calls them intranets.
Intranets.
Yeah, basically like closed off corporate versions of the internet. Like imagine a walled garden, but instead of flowers, it's your money.
And that goes against the whole idea behind Bitcoin, doesn't it?
Totally. The real power he's talking about is how it can connect people directly without needing banks or governments.
It's like he sees it as this inevitable force, like the internet itself.
Exactly. Remember back when people thought the internet was just a fad?
Yeah, and now we can't imagine life without it.
Right. And Antonopoulos thinks Bitcoin is on that same path. Totally disruptive, totally world-changing.
Okay, but the internet, as amazing as it is, can be pretty complex. I mean, most of us have no idea how it actually works.
And that's his point. He actually uses the example of BGP routing. Ever heard of it?
Not really.
Exactly. Most people haven't. It's this super complicated system that makes the internet work.
So, like, we don't need to be programmers to send emails.
Exactly. You don't need to understand the nitty-gritty of BGP routing to use the internet, just like you don't need to be a tech wizard to use Bitcoin.
So he's saying, don't get lost in the weeds.
This is about something much, much bigger.
Okay, but what does that actually look like? I mean, for someone who's just hearing about all this for the first time.
Well, he believes Bitcoin could bring financial inclusion to, like, billions of people who can't access traditional banking.
Okay, so we're talking about real change here.
He's talking about a world where your $20 Android phone becomes your gateway to a global financial system.
Okay, that is huge, but also kind of a lot to take in.
He gets that. He actually compares it to those early days of the internet. Messy, chaotic, even a little bit scary.
But also full of potential, right?
Exactly. The question is, what are we going to do with it? It's funny you should say scary, because there's this whole other side to Bitcoin that Antonopoulos talks about, like almost a philosophical side.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, he talks about money itself, like as a language.
Money as a language.
Yeah, it's how we express value, right?
Yeah.
How we collaborate and trade on this massive global scale.
Wow, I've never thought about it that way before.
And he makes this point. Whoever controls the language of money, they hold a lot of power.
That makes sense.
Throughout history, it's been kings, governments, banks. They set the rules.
And he sees Bitcoin as a challenge to that.
Exactly. It's like, for the first time ever, we have a form of money that isn't controlled by any single entity, but by this decentralized network.
It's not the internet of money.
Exactly. It's like instead of this top-down control, it's this open global forum where everyone has a voice.
Okay, I can see how that's both exciting and a little, well, unnerving.
Totally. Like, what if we get it wrong?
Right. What about the bad actors?
He addresses that head on. He says, look, this new world, it's not going to be perfect. There'll be challenges, there'll be risks, there'll be people trying to game the system.
Just like with the internet.
Exactly. But he's a big believer in education, transparency, and like widespread adoption as the antidotes to that.
Makes sense. More people understanding how it works means less chance of being taken advantage of.
Right. Transparency makes it harder for the bad guys to hide.
Okay, so we've got education and transparency, but how do we get to this world where Bitcoin isn't this niche, complicated thing? How do we get everyone using it?
Adoption. That's the key. And he keeps coming back to the internet analogy. Remember, it took time for people to understand it, to get comfortable with it.
And now look at it. We can't live without it.
Right. He thinks Bitcoin is on a similar trajectory.
From something kind of clunky and confusing to something we use every day without even thinking about it.
He seems to think so, yeah.
Yeah.
We're still in those early days, like figuring it all out as we go.
But he's optimistic.
Yeah, you can hear it in his voice. He sees this massive potential for it to change how we think about money, about value itself.
We haven't even talked about the environmental impact, though, and there's been a lot of news lately about how much energy Bitcoin mining uses.
Yeah, that's the big one, isn't it?
And a lot of that is from fossil fuels, right?
That's a valid concern, for sure. The process of mining Bitcoin can be pretty energy intensive.
So not exactly environmentally friendly.
Unfortunately, not always, no. But, and this is important, not all Bitcoin mining is created equal.
What do you mean?
Well, for one, there are more sustainable methods being explored.
Like what?
Some miners are starting to use renewable energy sources, like solar and wind power.
Okay, so there are more eco-friendly options out there.
And there's a growing push within the Bitcoin community itself to make mining more sustainable.
So it sounds like people are working on solutions.
Exactly. It's a conversation we need to be having. Like any new technology, there are trade-offs, right?
And we have to weigh them carefully.
Absolutely. And make responsible choices about the future we want to create.
You've been comparing Bitcoin to the internet this whole time, but earlier you also compared it to a foreign currency. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. It's like when you travel to another country, you usually exchange your home currency for the local currency, right?
Right, so you can actually use your money.
Right. Just easier to transact that way. You can buy things, pay for services, navigate that local economy more easily.
So you're saying we might use Bitcoin in a similar way?
Yeah, exactly. Imagine having some Bitcoin in your digital wallet, just like you might carry some foreign currency when you travel.
So it's not necessarily about getting rid of our existing currencies entirely.
Not at all. It's about having options.
Okay, so more like a new tool in your financial toolbox.
Exactly.
And one that could be especially useful for things like international transactions, maybe online purchases.
Exactly. You got it.
It makes it seem a lot less intimidating and a lot more usable.
And that's the thing. It's all about learning how to use this new tool safely and responsibly. Which brings us back to education, right?
Knowledge is power,
Yeah.
especially with something as new and complex as all of this.
Absolutely. And, this talk, it's pretty dense. There's a lot to unpack.
And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Right. Like we haven't even gotten into the really technical stuff yet.
Like how transactions are actually verified or the whole cryptography side of things.
Yeah, all that stuff that makes it actually work.
It's like a whole other language.
It is. And then there's the philosophical stuff, like what does a truly decentralized system mean for society?
It's like we're not just talking about reinventing money, but like reinventing how we trust, how we organize ourselves.
It's a pretty big thought, isn't it?
It is. It's a lot to take in.
Maybe it's a good place to take a breath and then come back and dive into some of these other aspects.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked about Bitcoin, like changing the world and all these big ideas, but let's get down to brass tacks here.
Brass tack.
Like the practical stuff. You said you actually use Bitcoin, right?
I do. It's not just theoretical for me.
Okay, so walk me through it. What does that actually look like? Like on a Tuesday afternoon, are you out there buying like groceries with Bitcoin?
Well, maybe not groceries, not yet, but I can pay some bills with it.
Yeah.
There are definitely companies out there accepting Bitcoin.
Really? What kind of companies? Like what kind of bills are we talking about?
Online purchases, mostly. I've gotten electronics, even plane tickets.
Wow, plane tickets. That's impressive. Do they like have a special Bitcoin register?
It varies. Sometimes they have a QR code you scan with your phone,
Oh.
and other times they use a payment processor that does some behind-the-scenes conversion.
So you're not like handing someone a physical Bitcoin?
Not yet, haha, though there are some brick-and-mortar stores starting to accept it too.
Okay, so maybe not your local coffee shop just yet.
Not yet, but actually there's something else, Bitcoin debit cards.
Wait, like debit cards but for Bitcoin?
Yeah, exactly. You link it to your Bitcoin wallet, and when you swipe it, it converts the equivalent amount to your local currency.
So it's like having a regular debit card but backed by Bitcoin.
Pretty much.
Uh.
And as the technology gets better, the infrastructure will just keep improving.
Makes sense. The easier it is to use, the more people will use it.
Exactly. And then the more people use it, the more valuable it becomes.
There's like a snowball effect.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating to watch it all unfold, even with the bumps along the way.
Kind of feels like we're standing on the edge of like a whole new world.
It does, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like anything new, It's going to be unpredictable, maybe a little messy at times.
A little scary even.
Yeah, for sure. But that's part of what makes it exciting. Like, we have a chance to be part of something totally new.
It reminds me of something Antonopoulos said about how this is like those early days of the internet where people were still unsure about buying things online.
Oh, absolutely. It takes time for trust to build, especially when we're talking about something as fundamental as money.
Right. It's like we're hardwired to be a little suspicious of change, especially when it comes to our wallets.
For sure.
Yeah.
But just like the internet opened up all these new possibilities, Bitcoin offers a completely new paradigm.
It's like we're not just talking about a new currency, but a new way of thinking about value itself.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here? What do we do with all of this?
Well, I'm not going to promise you'll be a Bitcoin billionaire overnight. But the most important thing is to stay curious. Don't be afraid to learn, experiment a little, form your own opinions.
Because this is all still being figured out, right?
Exactly. And that's what makes it so exciting. We're not just following a roadmap. We're like drawing it as we go.
I like that. So be curious, stay informed, and maybe we'll see you out there in the metaverse someday, paying for virtual pizza with Bitcoin.
No, that's a future I can get behind.
All right, on that note, I think we're going to have to wrap up this deep dive.
This has been fun.
It has. And hopefully you listening out there learned a thing or two, maybe had your mind blown a little, and most importantly, started asking some big questions.
Because this is a conversation that's only just beginning.
Exactly. So until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and who knows, maybe we'll all be using emojis as currency someday.
I wouldn't rule it out.
See you next time.